Before you reach for your phone tomorrow morning, before the first notification pulls your attention out of your own hands and into everyone else's world, there is a question worth sitting with. What if the very first thing you did each day was quietly deciding, without you even noticing, who you were about to become? Not through some grand transformation, not through willpower alone, gritted teeth, a burst of motivation that fades by Wednesday, through something smaller, stranger, and far more durable than most people ever learn to use. A 10-minute window, a handful of chosen words, repeated calmly on purpose before the noise of the world gets a vote in who you are. Most people spend that window half asleep, scrolling, already reacting to things outside their control before their feet have even touched the floor. Someone else's opinion, someone else's crisis, someone else's carefully curated morning, arriving in your hands before you've had a single private thought of your own. And then, months later, they wonder why nothing in their life seems to move, why the same worries return, why the same ceiling keeps appearing just above where they'd hoped to be by now. Tonight is not about hustle. It is not about forcing yourself into some louder, harder version of who you are, some caffeinated 5 a.m., cold shower version of discipline that collapses after 2 weeks and leaves you feeling worse for having tried it all. It is about something quieter and older than that, a simple law that has shaped the inner lives of disciplined people for as long as people have been trying to grow at all, long before anyone had a name for self-improvement or a shelf of books promising to fix them. Stay with this even if part of you is skeptical, even if you've heard some version of this before and it didn't take. By the end, you will understand exactly why 10 minutes used the right way can begin to rearrange a life from the inside out, quietly, without announcing itself, the way most real change actually happens. There is an old and simple law, one that has held true across generations regardless of circumstance, background, or belief. The words you repeat to yourself quietly and consistently become the beliefs you carry. Not the words you say once in a burst of motivation and forget by lunchtime. Not the vision board glanced at twice a year. The words you return to again and again in a calm and steady rhythm until your mind stops treating them as a wish and starts treating them as a fact it already knows about you. This is not mysticisms. It is closer to training. The same way a muscle responds to repeated deliberate use rather than a single dramatic effort. Your mind, left alone, will run on whatever thoughts are loudest and most frequent. And for most people, those thoughts are inherited from fear, from comparison, from the residue of a bad conversation replayed on a loop, from a hard year that quietly rewrote what they believe is possible for them. Thought responds to repetition whether you are directing it or not. Left undirected, it repeats worry. Directed with intention, it can just as easily repeat conviction. Say the same sentence to yourself every morning with real attention, and within weeks it stops sitting on the surface of your mind. It sinks. It becomes part of how you interpret a hard email, a slow month, the face in the mirror before you've had coffee. This is why the timing matters so much, more than people realize. The first minutes after waking are unusually soft. The critical, skeptical, defended part of your mind has not fully switched on yet. The part that argues, that lists reasons why you're not really that kind of person, that compares you unfavorably to who you were yesterday. Whatever you plant in that early undefended window tends to take root more easily than what you plant at noon, buried under 100 competing demands and a mind already tired of arguing with itself. A wise use of that window is not complicated. It does not require chanting, theatrics, or a special room. It requires choosing in advance 1 or 2 sentences that describe the person you are building, stated as if already true, not as a future hope, and giving them your full, unhurried attention before the day has a chance to hand you its own agenda instead. Here is the honest part, the part most people skip past because it is uncomfortable to say out loud. If you have tried something like this before and quietly abandoned it, you are not lazy and you are not broken. You are describing something almost everyone who has ever tried to change a habit has felt, usually without telling anyone. The alarm goes off, and the last thing your body wants is stillness. It wants a phone, or a snooze button, or the fastest possible escape route out of feeling anything at all before the day's demands arrive to distract you from feeling it. There is a very specific kind of resistance that shows up right at the edge of a new habit, a sort of internal flinching, and it rarely announces itself as defiance. It sounds reasonable. Not today, you're too tired. You'll start properly tomorrow. This feels a little strange, talking to yourself in an empty room before the sun's even up. You'll do it after coffee, after the shower, after the version of yourself that actually has energy for this shows up. Underneath those excuses is usually something more tender, something worth naming honestly instead of stepping around. A fear that you will try and quietly fail again and confirm what some private part of you already suspects, that nothing really changes for you, that other people have some capacity for follow-through you were simply never given. Maybe there's a familiar weight to mornings already, a low static of financial stress or self-doubt that makes 10 quiet minutes feel like an indulgence you can't afford when there are bills to think about and a day already stacked against you before it starts. Maybe it's simpler than that: comparison, the sense that everyone else seems to have figured out some version of themselves you haven't reached yet, and one more self-improvement habit just feels like one more way to notice the gap. Maybe it's procrastination wearing a more respectable disguise, the sense that you'll take this seriously once things settle down, once the busy season passes, once you have more energy to give it, and somewhere underneath that reasonable sounding delay is a quiet suspicion that once things settle down is a date that never actually arrives on its own. Or maybe it's something closer to a low familiar tiredness, the residue of having tried a version of self-improvement before, a planner that went unused after March, a resolution that quietly died sometime around the second week of January, and some understandable reluctance to hand your hope over to one more method that might ask for effort and give little back. If any of that lands close to true for you, you are not alone in it, and it does not mean anything is wrong with you. It means you are human, and this particular kind of growth asks you to sit with some discomfort before it gives you anything back. That discomfort is not a sign to stop. It is simply the entry fee, the same one paid quietly by everyone who has ever built something lasting out of something small, usually without an audience, usually without proof it was working until long after it already was. So let this be practical instead of abstract, because abstraction is where most good intentions go to die. Consider 3 small doorways into this habit, none of which require 10 uninterrupted candlelit minutes of perfect stillness, because that version of the habit rarely survives contact with a real Tuesday morning, a crying child, a late alarm, a demanding week. The first doorway, before your feet hit the floor, while you are still lying there in that soft, unguarded space between sleep and waking, silently say one sentence to yourself, one clear, present tense description of who you are becoming. Not a wish, not a hope, but a quiet statement of fact. Something like, I am someone who follows through on what I start. Say it slowly, say it twice. That is the entire practice in full on a hard morning, and it costs you 30 seconds, the second doorway, while you are doing something already automatic, brushing your teeth, making coffee, tying your shoes, standing in the shower. Let that same sentence run quietly in the background of your mind, attached to emotion your hands already know by heart. You are not adding a task to an already full morning. You are attaching a single thought to a habit that already exists without your effort, so the practice costs you nothing extra in time, only a small shift in attention. The third doorway, for the mornings you do have a few unhurried minutes, is the fuller version. Sit somewhere quiet. Close your eyes if that helps you settle. Picture one small specific scene from the day ahead in which you act exactly like the person your sentence describes. Not the whole day painted in broad strokes. One scene rendered clearly. The hard conversation, handled calmly instead of avoided. The workout you almost talk yourself out of, done anyway exactly as planned. Let yourself feel it in your body for a few seconds, the calm, the follow-through, before you open your eyes and let the day begin on its own terms. None of this will feel dramatic at first, and that is by design, not a flaw in the method. Growth built this way is cumulative, not explosive. It behaves less like a lightning strike and more like water moving slowly over stone, invisible in any single morning, unmistakable after enough of them have quietly accumulated. You will likely miss days. Some weeks you may miss more mornings than you complete. That is not a failure of the practice. It is simply what building any real habit looks like for every person who has ever built one, regardless of how effortless it may look from the outside. The only real mistake available to you here is deciding that a missed morning proves the whole thing doesn't work, and quietly walking away from something that was only ever asking for your return, not your perfection. Notice weeks in, if you stay with it, that the sentence you chose starts arriving on its own, uninvited, in the middle of a hard moment, doing its quiet work exactly when you need it most, long after you consciously stopped rehearsing it. That is the entire arc of this practice, start to finish. Not a sudden transformation you can point to on a calendar, a slow, earned shift in what your mind reaches for first when the day gets difficult. There is something in this that reaches beyond the mechanics of habit and repeated belief into something larger and quieter than the self alone. When you sit still for even a few minutes before the world asks anything of you, you are participating in something people across nearly every culture and era have understood in their own language. That stillness, chosen on purpose, opens a kind of receiving that noise never allows. Call it intuition if that word suits you. Call it alignment or grace, or simply the clarity of a mind finally given room to think without interruption. You do not need to name it precisely for it to have its effect on you. There is an unseen order to things that seems to respond less to force and more to steadiness, to a person who shows up quietly, day after ordinary day, asking for clarity rather than demanding immediate results. Trust here does not mean passivity or waiting for something to happen to you. It means doing the small, repeated thing with sincerity and allowing the larger shape of your life to organize itself around that consistency in its own time, on its own unhurried schedule, often arriving in forms you would never have designed for yourself if you'd been left in charge of the timeline. Consider a woman born into circumstances that offered her almost nothing in the way of encouragement toward a life defined by movement and strength. As a child, she survived scarlet fever and pneumonia, and then contracted polio, a disease that left one of her legs weakened and twisted, requiring a metal brace simply to allow her to stand upright. Doctors told her family she would likely never walk without assistance, let alone run. For years, her mother drove her hours each week across state lines to receive treatment, and at home, her siblings took turns massaging the affected leg every single day, a routine so repetitive and unglamorous it must have felt at times quietly hopeless to everyone involved. But something in her refused to accept the brace as a permanent sentence, handed down by doctors who had never met the rest of her. She began telling herself, quietly and consistently, that she would walk without it, not as a hope shouted once in a moment of frustration, but as a private, repeated conviction she returned to through years of unremarkable therapy sessions most people never saw and no one applauded. There was no single dramatic morning where the belief arrived fully formed. There was only the accumulation of ordinary ones, the same private sentence returned to again and again, long before there was any visible evidence it was doing anything at all. By age 12, she had shed the brace entirely, through nothing more dramatic than that same steady repetition, carried out far from any audience who might have told her it was working. She did not stop there. She kept returning to that same inner instruction, extended now towards something even larger than walking, running and running fast. She trained relentlessly and quietly, long before anyone outside her immediate family believed it was worth their attention or their belief. In 1960, in Rome, she became the first American woman to win 3 gold medals in track and field at a single Olympic Games. What is easy to miss in the applause that followed her afterward is the sheer volume of unremarkable repetition that preceded it. No cameras present, no crowd watching, just a girl, alone in a quiet room, repeating to herself, morning after ordinary morning, exactly who she intended to become, long before her body had caught up to match the belief she had already decided to carry. I am someone who follows through on what I start. Across nearly every wisdom tradition that has survived the long passage of centuries, there exists some version of this same basic instinct, that the first words of the day matter more than they appear to, and that repeating them with real sincerity shapes something deeper in a person than the passing moment itself. In some traditions, this takes the form of prayer beads moved slowly and deliberately between the fingers, one bead for each phrase, said without any hurry at all. In others, it is a single word or short phrase repeated as the breath moves in and then out, again and again, until the ordinary noise of the mind gradually grows quiet enough to hear something beneath it. In quieter households, with no particular formal religious observance at all, it might simply be a grandmother's lifelong habit of saying one short line of gratitude before anyone else in the house has even woken. The outward forms differ enormously from place to place. The instinct underneath them does not. There is an old teaching, found in some recognizable form in nearly every place people have gathered together to make sense of their lives, that says something close to this. What you carry into the deliberate silence of the morning, you carry with you into everything that follows it. Not as superstition, and not as ritual performed for its own sake. As practice, as a way of placing your attention on purpose, on exactly who you intend to become, before the world has been given the chance to place its own agenda there for you instead. I trust the steady, quiet work I return to each morning, somewhere below this, for anyone who finds themselves wanting a more structured path through mornings like these. There is more waiting to be found. Whenever you're ready to look for it, my mind is fertile ground, and I am careful on purpose about what I plant in it. I am becoming slowly and honestly the person my mornings quietly describe. There will be mornings this feels foolish, and there is no use pretending otherwise. There will be mornings you forget entirely, and mornings you remember perfectly well and skip anyway, because the bed is warm and the sentence feels distant from whatever you're actually carrying that day. None of that undoes the practice or proves it was never real to begin with. Growth built this way does not ask for a run of perfect mornings, and it was never going to. It asks for enough of them, strung together loosely and imperfectly over time, to slowly outweigh the ones you miss. Somewhere in that return, not the unbroken streak, but the willingness to simply come back the next day without punishing yourself for the gap, is where the actual durable change quietly lives. If you find yourself wanting a fuller version of this practice, something with more structure to lean on when a single sentence doesn't feel like enough, that kind of guidance is not far from where you're sitting right now. So tomorrow, before the phone, before the noise, before the day has a chance to hand you its version of who you should be today, take 10 minutes or 5 or even 1 if that's genuinely all you have to give it. Choose the sentence carefully in advance so you're not scrambling for words while half asleep, still tangled in the last edges of a dream. Say it slowly. Let it sit in the quiet part of the morning where nothing has had the chance to argue with it yet, where the day hasn't started asking things of you. You will not feel different tomorrow. You may not feel meaningfully different next week, and that's not a sign of failure, only a sign of how this actually works. Slowly, beneath the surface, in a way that rarely announces itself until long after it has already begun. There is no finish line here, no single morning where the work is suddenly complete and you can stop returning to it. There is only the practice itself, chosen again tomorrow and again the day after that, quietly outlasting the mornings you skip. But the mind that repeats something with sincerity, morning after morning, eventually stops arguing with it, and somewhere inside that quiet, hard-won agreement, a different life slowly begins to take shape, one still, unremarkable, deliberately chosen morning at a time. Not the life you announce to anyone. The life you simply start living, one sentence at a time, long before anyone else notices the difference. Rest now. Let the words settle. Tomorrow, before anything else has a say, you begin again.